On the Sunderland seafront, the close of the illuminations. A chance to enjoy the best of a northeast city described on a tourism website as welcoming and bustling. But for 2 years, Sunderland's been the focus of something more troubling.
I'm not a racist, I'm not a fascist, and I'm not far right. I'm a confused and scared resident of Sunderland. I don't want to be raped, and I don't want my children to be raped.
The UKIP leader, Gerard Batten, has taken up the cause of a group of female campaigners. He's also made the issue of grooming gangs one of his central focuses.
This, in my opinion, is the biggest social scandal in English history. Victims of this, the white girls and the Sikh girls, were supposed to keep their mouths shut for the sake of diversity.
This Newsnight investigation looks at what can happen when a local issue is taken up by controversial national groups. Our cameras haven't always been welcome.
Don't touch him! Don't touch him!
We've been blocked from filming.
About what?
About everything.
Farright, extremists.
And
is that not true? That's not true.
Far wrong.
We wanted to understand the grievances of a small group of women in Sunderland who are behind a new campaign and scrutinise claims that they're being used by the far right. They're called Justice for Women and Children. They say they want safer streets, better treatment of sexual assault victims and an end to cover-ups of grooming gangs.
You Natasha Allan? I'm from the BBC from Newsnight. I just wanted to know what...
But the founder of the group apparently didn't want to talk.
You know what we're talking about, Go on, just talk to the BBC. We want to know about your group. We want to know what it's about.
BBC.
She looked like she did, but you didn't want her to.
Fuck the BBC.
Their group offers a helpline for people who say they've been victims of sexual assault. They've even referred to themselves as the new social services. One of their leading members told me this.
It's about rape and grooming, it's about the rape of our children, the rape of our women, and the police not doing enough about it, and the establishment keeping it under wraps.
Others say different. They join counter-protests against justice for women and children.
The people who are here today are basically a front for the far right.
Why do you say that?
Because not once have they actually turned and condemned any of the actions of those that have stood alongside them.
There are people with this group today who are racists, who have come, who have been part of the EDL, who've been part of very nasty far-right groups. And I don't know how they dare use the stories of children who've been abused to propagate racism in my town.
Those local views are backed up by national voices.
Well, Justice for Women and Children is the first far-right group to really come centre stage. It's led by women and it has women's voices, but the messages are exactly the same. It comes out of the far right.
I think what we're seeing now is a new breed of the far right. They've modernised, they've professionalised themselves. They are increasingly using the language of human rights, for example, free speech, or even women's rights.
For some, this is all tied into the still-emerging story of the rapes perpetrated by gangs of British men of mainly Pakistani heritage. With UKIP focused on it, controversially, Gerard Batten appointed the former EDL founder, Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, as his grooming advisor. That led senior figures to desert the party. But there are those who believe the centre ground's approach to street grooming gangs has exacerbated the problem.
If there are areas that the mainstream consider no-go, then those on the fringes tend to flood into them. And what I'm seeing of the way and the language that's being used by the far right when it comes to grooming gangs is racist, is hostile, is stirring up division in this country. So we have to fill that vacuum, have a sensible debate, look at the facts, and try and find a way to resolve a particular form of child abuse so that other people don't exploit that.
The background to the Sunderland story dates back to 2016, when a young woman said she was raped and assaulted by Middle Eastern migrants. We're not identifying her, But the campaign set up in her name, which also began with the word justice, attracted contentious national and international groups to the city. The former co-founder of the English Defence League, Tommy Robinson, took up the cause.
We're in Sunderland covering a community campaign for justice for a young English girl who was gang raped by Syrian refugees.
The alt-right Canadian website he reports for funded a billboard. And Britain First, the political organisation set up by ex-BNP members, got involved.
This isn't just happening here, this is happening in Kent, it's happening in Rotherham, it's happening in Rochdale, and these police officers are bastard traitors for doing nothing about it!
Up to 1,000 people took to the streets. One of the city's councillors takes us back to that time.
It's been month after month, regular weekend protests. They've taken over the city centre quite frequently, as in, there's been Hells Angels, motorbikes in the city centre, shops have had to close. The character of them has gradually got more and more aggressive, and as different sort of hangers-on, different far-right groups have started to attach to the cause, it's got taken on a very different tone and become something quite unpleasant and quite intimidating to have happening in your city centre.
It's a local demonstration, I'm just coming here to support it.
Tommy Robinson threw his full weight behind the campaign, even raising money for a lawyer. After what the Crown Prosecution Service termed a thorough police investigation, nobody was prosecuted for the alleged rape. There wasn't the evidence, says the CPS, but the campaigners believe it was botched. The case played into a far-right agenda, according to Hope Not Hate.
This fuels this paranoid idea that overwhelmingly people are conspiring to allow Muslims to rape women in this country. Sadly and unfortunately, there is evidence in some areas, I think Rotherham is one, where there have been huge mistakes made by people who think they will be accused of being racist for intervening and getting involved in these cases. But overwhelmingly, in the cases in the North East, there's no evidence to suggest that any assaults haven't been investigated or prosecuted.
How many people are aware that children were being groomed as far back as 30 years ago in this town?
Now, a new campaign, also styled around the word justice, has emerged from Sunderland. This is a recent small-scale demonstration in Middlesbrough. Here they talked about grooming gangs, better checks on taxi drivers and takeaways, as well as their opposition to forced adoptions, gender policies and what's taught to children in school. UKIP has taken justice for women and children to its heart. The leader tweeted his support when his party invited one of the organisers, Sharon Binks, to September's UKIP conference. She says she became an activist after going on one of the original Sunderland marches.
I learnt from Tommy Robinson the extent of the grooming gangs and rape jihad that had been covered up for many years by the establishment. I realised I'd been living in a bubble. I was sacked for religious discrimination in December in case I upset a Muslim with my views. I'd shared my views on paedophile priests in the Catholic Church many times and nobody raised an eyebrow, let alone sack me in case I upset a Catholic.
A demonstration in London by the Democratic Football Lads Alliance. This group was described by a counter-terrorism source as the UK's biggest grassroots far-right street protest movement. It was the first time Newsnight came across Sharon Binks and justice for women and children. They'd been gaining prominence, not just with UKIP. They're closely allied to the DFLA, often sharing platforms. They appeared to be the poster girls at this demonstration with their campaign to protect women and children.
What are you voting for, bro?
Not many here like the BBC.
Wankers. You're wankers. A lot of you are fake news.
I asked Sharon Binks if, as some have claimed, their campaign is overly focused on one kind of rape only.
Straight away you're asking if it's Muslims, Asians, whatever.
The best thing to do is go on Facebook and have a look at Justice for Women and Children, and have a look at the page and have a look at the posts on there. And it's not about Muslims, it's about everybody. It's about everybody raping and grooming.
And then go on YouTube or UKIP and look at my speech there and it tells you everything you need to know.
So you get angry when people say you're racist, obviously?
Obviously.
Because you're not.
Because we're not.
Brother.
Shortly afterwards, the march organisers decided to take exception to our camera. They say the BBC is selective in its coverage, making them out to be racist when they're not.
The BBC will edit this. They will not show this. They will not show an Asian guy with a DFLA that's turned away from Islam. They will edit this. Their lies will be exposed.
Soon after, we were surrounded by men who stopped us filming. It became clear we needed to get out.
So we've had to leave. It just didn't feel safe in there anymore. I mean, we were pointed out from the stage, that's fine. We were heckled because we were BBC. That's pretty standard these days. But when the cameraman became a target and it became physical, that just felt really unsafe and we had to get out of there.
A month after we first encountered the DFLA and Justice for Women and Children, on the other side of Europe, Poland held its annual Independence Day march. Many gather here to celebrate their country's history, but it's also become a magnet for far-right groups. Last year, some here chanted for a pure white Poland. Extremists were still in evidence this year, but there were no reports of those chants. Sharon Binks was somewhere amongst these crowds. She chatted to a Polish demonstrator and relayed their conversation later on an online site.
He didn't do anything about our situation with Islam taking over. And it sounds like he was concerned about the same thing for Poland because he's a Christian, he's a Catholic, that the Jews were taking over and controlling Poland.
When we met again in Middlesbrough, it wasn't something she wanted to discuss.
Sharon Binks, it's Newsnight again, we met before. I'm from the BBC.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about that march in Poland.
No.
What were you doing on that march in Poland? Whites only in Europe.
Back in Sunderland, we wanted to know about the background to the women's campaign. We learnt that this park was in a sense a catalyst, and that the group evolved not as a result of grooming gangs, but something more locally specific. Earlier this year, 4 rapes, some suspected to have been carried out by asylum seekers, were reported here and in a local street in the space of days. That prompted the Justice for Women and Children founder, Natasha Allan, to set up the Facebook page. This is what she said at an early rally with the DFLA, attended by the UKIP leader Gerard Batten.
I'm not a racist, I'm not a fascist, and I'm not far right. I'm a confused and scared resident of Sunderland. I don't want to be raped, and I don't want my children to be raped.
Sunderland is the safest city in the north of England. For them to pick on rapes as a method of getting people to be fearful, I think was terribly unfair. It's entirely the wrong message, and I will absolutely say that that's not true. It's not certainly true to say that it's only caused by a certain section of society depending on the colour of their skin.
They say they're not saying that.
Well, they can say what they say. I'm giving you my answer on it. That is once again inflammatory and deliberate in my view.
But just what is the evidence against the Justice for Women and Children group? They say they aren't racist, and in amongst their posts, they have asked contributors to refrain from racist comments. When you scroll through their Facebook page, rapists and paedophiles are called out, no matter their background or ethnicity. It's a depressing and apparently endless sharing of the worst side of human depravity. But some of the comments posted by others on the site do use extreme racist terms openly. The language is offensive and the comments haven't been moderated by the group. And on the founder's personal Facebook page, Natasha Allan doesn't challenge others who make similar racist comments. Why? Natasha Allan's also shared this video about Muslims taking over Europe.
In just 39 years, France will be an Islamic republic.
She's also posted about Islam being the evil of the world. She says if that makes me a racist, then yeah, I'll take that.
When it comes to anti-Muslim hatred, a lot of people say that they're not being racist because Islam's not a race. Well, I would say what we can see in Justice for Women are people who have associations, at the very least, long-time associations with the extreme far right.
Amongst those is Natasha Allan's brother, Tommy Allan.
Muslim pedos!
This was him at one of the original Sunderland marches. Now he attends Justice for Women and Children demos, sometimes apparently as a steward. He claims on social media to be a member of the Sunderland Defence League and the North East Infidels, which is described as extreme right-wing by the Commission for Countering Extremism. Mr. Allan says, "We're the infidels that Allah warned you about." Hope Not Hate also claim he has previously marched with National Action, one of whose followers murdered the MP Joe Cox. They've since become a banned terrorist organisation.
This is an organisation that went on demonstrations a year before where they were calling for Jews to be murdered, and now suddenly they're turning up and alongside these women and they're saying, oh yes, but having once loved murder of people, we care about women. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Tommy Allan was convicted for his part in the Dover riots in 2016, when groups including the National Front clashed with counter-protesters. He makes his views on refugees graphically clear in this post, talking about tossing them into the sea. Newsnight's also found other men who attend Justice for Women and Children protests. Some have convictions for the Dover riots, are in the North East Infidels and previously marched with National Action.
I think that's really quite telling of what that campaign is about.
We showed our evidence to the lead commissioner for countering extremism in England and Wales.
Well, it's really, really shocking, but I have to say that I'm not surprised by it. I've spent the last couple of months visiting around 13 different towns and cities across England and Wales, and it's clear to me that we are at the beginning of a new wave of far-right extremism in our country. What you've shown me in Sunderland are similar pictures that I've seen in different parts of the country. There's a particular local issue that's arisen, that's creating tension in that area, and far-right activists from across the country will often come to that particular part of the country to try and exploit that situation and recruit people to their cause.
For Sara Khan, in Sunderland, a local issue has been exploited. Justice for Women and Children was set up because of 4 reported rapes, and 2 men, an Iraqi and an Iranian, have recently been convicted in one of the cases. They raped a woman in their bedroom in a flat that housed asylum seekers. The claim that migrants are a danger to Sunderland's women had already been voiced often on these streets, and around the time the rape allegations surfaced, both the local MP and the council wrote to the government asking to pause the scheme that relocates new asylum seekers to the city due to local tensions. The council leader told us outside forces had been whipping up anti-immigrant feelings in Sunderland.
I think they came with an agenda to prey on the fears of people, to inflate worries, and to try and get them to buy into their fear of the other. It's always stranger danger, we can blame everything on them. And that did not help.
Some people would say it worked, what they were doing, because you did then react.
It did work in the short term because people genuinely can be made fearful relatively easily. We did work with the community.
You also bought into it. You paused the scheme.
We had to pause the scheme, but that wasn't because of what the right-wing pressure was. It was the sheer number of asylum seekers and refugees in the city at that point in time, in a very small area of the city, where we were having difficulty getting the community cohesion, which we're normally really very good at.
Far-right organisations, wherever they emerge or protest, can exploit community tensions, like here in Rotherham. One of the issues they keep coming back to is grooming gangs. Newsnight's previously spoken to female survivors who told us they felt the English Defence League seen here and the likes of Tommy Robinson exploit their situation to suit their own agenda. The widespread and justified anger about the horrific crimes by men of mainly Pakistani heritage in places like Rotherham can be harnessed for other purposes.
I'm very concerned whether it's the extreme left or the extreme right who are using some of the most abhorrent abuse of children for their own political agenda. And that has to stop. These people have been through enough. They don't want to be used as a pawn for someone else's game, whether that's to demonise a particular group, whether that's to further their political career. It is despicable that people are doing that. However, as a sort of a centralist, middle-class woman who wants to do best, I have to say that because others of a similar position haven't stepped up and fought for these girls, fought for prevention, fought to get perpetrators behind bars, we have created a vacuum which enables other groups to come in and exploit that situation.
After what happened in the city she represents, Sarah Champion wrote that Britain has a problem with British Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls. She had to resign as Labour's Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities.
Did you think more Rotherhams, more Rochdales, more Telfords could be happening and they're not coming out yet?
I know that the abuse of children, and specifically the abuse and exploitation of children by gangs of predominantly Pakistani men, is still going on. And we're still not addressing that. And part of the reason is that we actually won't look at the facts, we won't look at the motivators, we won't look at the cultural commonalities that's going on, which then makes it very, very difficult for the police to prevent this stuff.
Many are worried that the silence of the mainstream is being filled by groups with far-right associations, and when their message comes from women, it can be powerful. The government is warning far-right extremism is rising. Whatever new forms it's taking, the potential for racist views to spread could have serious implications for our country.